In the business world, there's one word you hear over and over again, right? Growth. Grow your revenue, grow your market share, grow your team. It's treated like the ultimate goal, the unquestioned mantra of success. But what if that whole obsession with getting bigger is actually flawed? What if, after a certain point, growth stops building value and starts creating total chaos? Well, today, we're going to dive into some fascinating research from Dr. Senthil Kumar, who really challenges this whole bigger is better idea. Let's dig into what he calls the growth paradox.
So let's just start with the biggest question right off the bat. We celebrate growth in all its forms, don't we? Gradual, exponential, you name it. But have we ever really stopped to ask, is all of that growth actually good growth? I mean, we see companies chasing scale like it's the only thing that matters, buying up competitors, expanding everywhere, just ballooning in size. But does that automatically mean better performance, more innovation, a healthier company? The evidence we're about to look at suggests the answer is a big, fat no.
And Dr. Kumar puts this so well when he says that growth has two faces. On the one hand, yeah, it can lead to amazing things, wealth, cooperation, that incredible feeling of achievement. That's the growth we're all aiming for. But there's a flip side, a dark side. Unchecked growth can lead to what physicists call entropy, basically a slow slide into disorder and chaos. For a business, that looks like internal politics, turf wars, total inefficiency, a mess. The very act of chasing bigness can make a company just fall apart from the inside.
Okay, so to really get why growth can go bad, we first have to understand that it doesn't just happen in a bubble. It doesn't matter if we're talking about a tiny organism or a giant corporation. All growth runs up against these fundamental, often invisible constraints. Dr. Kumar points out three really critical walls that every growing thing eventually hits. Let's break them down.
First up, growth is time-dependent. It has to follow the patterns of its own era. I mean, think about it, right? A company's growth potential is totally shaped by the economic cycles, the tech, the politics of its time. You can't just take a growth strategy from a 1980s factory and slap it onto a 2020 software company and expect it to work. The context, the timing, that's everything. Sure, you get these big innovative leaps, but for the most part, growth is stuck to the rhythm of history.
Second, and this one is a really cool concept, growth is path-dependent. What this means is that the choices you're making today are seriously limited by all the choices that were made yesterday. The road you've already walked pretty much determines where you can go next. An organization, just like a species, can't just escape its own DNA, its founding ideas, its early tech choices, its culture. All of that stuff creates a path that is incredibly hard to change.
And wow, this slide right here makes that idea of path dependence crystal clear. It's a classic story. So Roman roads were built to be wide enough for two horses, side by side. That measurement then influenced the width of wagons in England. And those wagons set the standard for railway gauges in Britain and the US. Fast forward centuries later, NASA needs to move its giant rocket boosters by train. But the size of the boosters was limited by the width of the railway tunnels, which was set, all those years ago, by the width of a Roman horse's backside. An ancient decision completely constrained one of the most advanced pieces of tech in human history. That's the mind-blowing power of path dependence.
And finally, the third constraint is space dependence. This one's a little more obvious. Growth needs fuel, right? It's limited by physical space and the resources you have available or don't have. The article gives this great example of the wide-open land in 19th century North America. It allowed for this huge expansion that would have been totally impossible in more crowded countries. And today, it's not just about land, it's about having access to talent, to capital, to data, to energy. Without those resources, growth just stalls.
So we've got these three major constraints: time, path, and space. And for most of the 20th century, the main strategy was just to power through them with sheer scale. The idea was pretty simple. Build a gigantic, all-in-one company, a scale economy titan that could control its own resources, set its own path, and just dominate its era. But, as we're about to see, that whole model is starting to crack.
Let's just put it out there, a bold statement that's backed up by data. The promise of the scale economy. This idea that being bigger automatically means you're more profitable and have a lasting advantage, that promise is breaking. The world's just different now. We've moved from an economy based on scale to one based on knowledge, and the old rules just don't work anymore. The very strategies that built the giants of the past are now making them slow, fragile, and unresponsive.
And this chart just nails the point. Take a look at this data on U.S. public companies from 1970 to 2013. Follow the columns for assets and revenue. You see this story of just massive growth. Assets per firm jumped from around 831 million to over 18 times billion. Revenue grew tenfold. Now, by the old logic, these companies should be more profitable than ever. But now, look over at the profitability numbers. Return on sales, ROS, it tanks from 6.1% all the way down to negative 0.1%. Return on equity, a huge deal for investors, drops from 9.4% to just 4.2%. So here's the kicker. These firms got way, way bigger, but they became a lot less profitable. They were growing, sure, but they weren't developing.
So what gives? Well, the game changed. In the knowledge economy, value comes from things like creativity, agility, and innovation, not just from having a bunch of factories. Technology has made it so much easier for smaller, specialized firms to work together. In this new world, a world we often call VUCA because it's so volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, the huge size of those old-school giants has actually become a problem, not an advantage. They're just too slow, too bureaucratic, and frankly, too risky.
And this all brings us to a really powerful and kind of scary metaphor from Dr. Kumar's work. He uses a story from Indian mythology to describe what happens when a company just gets too big for its own good. It becomes what he calls a cannibal corporation. The story of the Bakasura demon is a pretty vivid warning, isn't it? This creature grew so massive, its hunger became so endless, that it literally turned on itself and started eating its own body, just to survive. And that's exactly what can happen to an organization that chases growth with no balance, no sense of sustainability. It gets so big and complex that its own internal machinery, the turf wars, the bureaucracy, the fighting for resources, starts to eat away at the very value it's supposed to be creating. It starts eating its own limbs in a desperate, self-defeating quest for more.
So if the old model of being the biggest, baddest shark in the ocean is failing, what's the alternative? How do you actually succeed in a world that's constantly changing? Well, the answer isn't to try to be a bigger, stronger shark. The answer is to become a school of fish.
This is what's called the school of fish or shoaling strategy. Instead of building one giant, clunky organization, you intentionally design your company as a collection of smaller, independent, networked parts. Think modules, alliances, franchises, empowered teams, that kind of thing. These smaller units can then come together in these flexible, agile groups to tackle problems and jump on opportunities, just like a school of fish that can move and react as one, even though it's made up of thousands of individuals.
This chart just lays it out perfectly. The old versus the new. On the left, you have the shark strategy. That's the old scale economy. It's all about top-down control. Its advantage comes from being huge and having a big market share. It's standardized and centralized, like a big tower. Now look at the school of fish on the right. Its whole structure is built on knowledge-based networks. It's all about cooperation and trust, and its design is modular, diverse, and decentralized, more like a kaleidoscope. It is a completely different way of thinking about how to build a successful company.
And hey, this isn't just some abstract theory. Some of the world's most successful companies are already doing it. Nucor, the huge steelmaker, runs as 90 separate businesses that all work together. We all know how Google famously blew itself up to become Alphabet, a collection of different companies under one roof to give each one more freedom. Kyocera in Japan operates with over 3,000 tiny independent units they call amoebas. And even GE, the absolute poster child for the 20th century giant, recently split itself up to be more agile and unlock its value.
So what's the bottom line here? The advantages are pretty clear. The school of fish strategy lets you have high growth without all the dangerous side effects of just being big. By breaking things up, you lower your investment risk. You can try out multiple strategies at the same time, tailored for different markets. And most importantly, it encourages the exact things you need to win today: agility, speed, and constant innovation. At the end of the day, it just creates a more balanced and sustainable company.
Which really brings us to the final thought. The business world isn't a calm pond anymore, where the biggest fish always wins. It's a turbulent ocean, always changing. And that old apex predator, the giant shark, is proving to be too slow and too vulnerable. The future belongs to the agile, the adaptive, the collaborative. So the question you really have to ask yourself, for your team, for your company, for your own career, is this: in an ocean of constant change, are you building a shark or are you building a school of fish?